Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Freight Insider Podcast, where we are opening the doors to the business of freight. I'm your host, Paige Siplon. I always say that freight is the common denominator in this complicated math problem we call our national economy. Every business is touched by freight, but the how it touches businesses and us as individuals really varies greatly and really matters. Some companies exist to solely move freight by rail or by truck. Others track it, some create it, there's technology. Other companies rely on really just receiving it to share with other consumers or other businesses that then consume it. Freight is complicated, but freight is exciting and frankly a well too kept secret for our business industry around the nation. Today, I have a very special guest joining me. We've known each other for a long time. After a 10-year career with the Association of Georgia's Textile, Carpet, and Consumer Products Manufacturers, GTMA, which is less of a mouthful. My guest joined CSX Transportation and CSX in 2001, currently the Regional Vice President for State Government Relations, overseeing the company's government relations and public affairs activities over a 7-state region. He also serves in his spare time numerous boards: Georgia Chamber of Commerce, Louisiana Railroad Association, Georgia Railroad Association, Georgia Operation Lifesaver, Transportation Alliance, where he's vice chairman also of the Georgia Youth Science and Technology Center, and serves on the executive committee of the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Services Board, and has a passion for the Georgia Special Olympics, where he's on the honorary board there as well. My guest today is Mr. Craig Camuso. Welcome to the Freight Insider, Craig.
Hi, Paige. Thanks for having me. Look forward to our discussion.
No, we're looking forward to it. Been looking forward to this for some time now. Craig, we always like to start off and just hear a little bit. You heard me talk a little bit about your background, but that doesn't give it justice. You've had a pretty amazing freight journey through your career so far. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what your freight journey, your personal freight journey, how that started. I see the Georgia Bulldog stuff behind you. As a Georgia Tech guy, we'll let that slide, but as we've joked about in years past. But so how did your freight journey start off? What did your personal journey begin with?
Sure.
And how did you get into this industry?
Well, thanks. And first of all, it's an honor to be involved with this. As you mentioned, you and I our relationship goes back many years when you really kind of stepped up innovation and logistics in the state of Georgia. And it's really kind of taken off, especially over the last decade or so. But I'm a native of Georgia, as you can see, go Dogs. But really got involved in freight and logistics when I started with CSX back in 2001. And of course, as you had mentioned prior to that, I had served working and representing the textile industry in Georgia. And when you think about those two industries and how they come together, really they make up the backbone of the state of Georgia. I mean, so many towns and cities we go through, if it was not there by the textile industry back in the day, it was there because of the railroads. And you look at some of the cities that through which CSX runs, such as Union Point or West Point or Waycross. I mean, these companies got their names, because of the railroad. So for me, it started when I joined CSX in 2001. Like so many other people, didn't know a lot about the railroad. They think about the railroad when maybe they're hear the horn at night, or they go over a grade crossing, but they really don't understand exactly what the railroad industry does for them. And I was a little bit of the same way. A lot of people think that the railroads are owned by the government. I get that an awful lot, but actually we are a Fortune 500 company that operates in 23 states east of the Mississippi. You think about a line that runs from New Orleans to Memphis to Chicago, and east of that, we operate in those states, including in 2 Canadian provinces. So the railroad industry, as I've come to learn over these years, really makes up a huge part of all of our daily lives, from the time we wake up until the time we go to bed. But mine started back, literally started when I started with CSX in 01.
Wow. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and it's changed so much over the years, and we'll get into that for sure from a CSX perspective, and the impact that freight rail has on not just Georgia, and not just the 7 states you represent, but really the nation. And you mentioned even into Canada and our partners down to Mexico as well. So that kind of brings us to where you are now. CSX, as you mentioned, 23 states, 20,000 route miles across your network. If that's still accurate, it's growing every day. I'm sure we'll talk about investment as well. 200 years, CSX has played a critical role in the nation's economic expansion and industrial development, and linking into the short lines, and then also fueling and enabling trucks to do what they do. It's really part of this ecosystem, which I mentioned in the beginning, that freight rail really plays a big part of. I think we'll start off, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about pandemic sort of first. It's still fresh on everybody's mind, although I firmly believe if we're not out of it, we're getting really darn close. But it's caused disruptions in our own personal lives, and it's really changed people. But it's also created some pretty incredible, disturbing disruptions in all areas of freight. And I don't think rail has really been exempt from that. What are some of the challenges you've seen dealing with and adapting to the changes the pandemic's brought for the freight rail industry and CSX?
Sure. Well, we as you mentioned, we were not immune to the effects, the domino effects of the pandemic. And actually, even coming to you today from my home office is part of that. We've gotten used to working from home. We've learned how to adjust. We've kind of changed the way we do things, and CSX certainly was was impacted, and how it was a little bit later, once mid-March rolled around of 2020, excuse me, that it really kind of hit us, because as they had to give a little bit of time for the whole logistics chain to almost come to a stop. And certainly that had a profound impact on us, really, when you look at the end of March into the beginning of April.
Right.
And we had to, the first thing we had to do was to make sure that we were considered essential employees, or an essential industry, which we did. And that kept me busy with the various governments that we have, just to make sure that we were on that list so that we could continue to operate. But we had to operate in such a way that was still safe, as we always have, but even more so safe for our employees, to keep them in a situation so that we would not, be without them. But still, we certainly had employees that came under the pandemic. I even got COVID back in January. I don't run the trains, but I had it as well. So obviously we were all impacted. Mm-hmm. What we saw was, we were not moving as much freight, so therefore there was a little bit of a dip in our employment levels. Some folks just, we just didn't have work for them. What we're seeing now is that it's coming back, and it's coming back really strong. CSX has been well prepared for that, but we still are facing the challenges of making sure that we have the number of crews that we need, that we're putting the number of locomotives, that we have the right number to go ahead and move the freight that is coming, because we have seen an uptick in virtually all of the sectors where we operate, and we see that is going to continue here through the remainder of the year.
Yeah, that uptick has certainly been in place for the rest of the industry as well. Not surprised that the railroad industry is still impacted. And, but speaking of that impact, the role, you talked a little bit about it when you talked about CSX, but plays a significant role. And we were talking about the Ports Authority earlier, and the great work your daughter is doing, interning there, riding on container ships and things that guys like me and you would love to be able to go do. She's
doing things I never thought that she would do. Even going up the elevator and getting in the crane, which she did. I'm a little claustrophobic, so she told me last week that, Dad, I don't know that you can handle this, and that might not work out.
I've been up there too. It is tight. I'll tell you, it's tight.
It is. That's what I understand. I mean, what they fed a couple of folks in there, so I know I would struggle with that. So I like the openness. But one thing I told her, and as it relates to CSX, is I said, you're really going to see how commerce moves. And when we talk about what's really driving, what's assisting or playing a critical role in driving CSX and our operations, it is the port. Mm-hmm. And you look at what's going on down at the Georgia Port Authority, the mega rail facility, that is going to be coming online in full capacity here, soon. That is aimed at reaching way far beyond the state of Georgia and even way far beyond the Southeast. It's going to reach into the heartland of the country, and that coupled with the harbor deepening efforts that are going on.
Finally.
Yeah, exactly. We see that's going to be a drive, and not just the Georgia Port Authority, but we serve ports up and down the East Coast from New Jersey, New York, all the way down towards Florida and everything in between. Your Charlestons, your Norfolks, as well as the ports of Jacksonville, ports of Tampa. So we and freight is continuing to move into those, and we continue to serve those. Another part of that port strategy is the inland ports that are starting to come on. Obviously, we have one that we serve, owned by the Georgia Port Authority in Chatsworth, Georgia.
That's right.
And that has really started to move as well, especially as the Chattanooga, Dalton areas continue to grow. We'll continue to see increases in our operations there, and even in other states.
In fact,
the
textile industry, you mentioned Dalton.
The textile carpet industry, of course, we haul a lot of those chemicals that
Yep.
go into the manufacturing of carpets. Again, back to the connection with my career as well. So we see that as the growth points. Obviously, and I believe you had Griff on.
We did.
Not long
We talked
ago.
a lot about rail. Yeah.
Yeah, that and they see that, the ports have recognized that while the trucking industry is a partner of ours with some of the intermodal facilities, they also know that you look at the stress on the roads and the bridges. I was reading something this morning about what had happened in Memphis with the crack in that bridge that is really leading to some adjustments having to be made in the trucking industry. So you see things like that going on, the need for investment in the nation's infrastructure, which hopefully will be addressed in Washington soon.
Yeah.
And all the more need for freight rail. So ports want to grow they want to at least try to grow that freight at the same rate that their overall freight is growing, grow that freight rail. And with the Georgia Ports Authority's situation, they want to grow it even more.
Yeah.
So we've got an excellent relationship with the powers that be down there, and working with them on a consistent basis, not only CSX but Norfolk Southern as well, to try to help alleviate the stress that we will see on the roads. But what that leads to is yet another challenge for us, and that is capacity on our own network.
Right.
So you see, and from a investment standpoint, we for the most part own our own railroads, our lines, and therefore
not to interrupt you. That's a really important point. You mentioned this before, but for our listeners, I'll just reiterate that a lot of folks don't know that, especially folks maybe in our industry, that the roads we drive on or drive our trucks on are owned almost 100% and funded by almost 100% by tax dollars and governments. And CSX, just to say this again because it's worth repeating, CSX and Norfolk Southern, the other private industry, are private industry, and you invest in your infrastructure. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, you're right, and thank you for making that. Yeah, thanks for making that point, because we invest back into our network. As a matter of fact, the most capital intensive industry out there. So we see that with the growth in freight, that the need to be able to invest in the future for us is going to continue to grow. And we're going to continue to utilize the assets that we have to the best of our ability, and at the same time be able to serve those customers in a safe and efficient manner.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so talking about customers, obviously the rail, you mentioned this briefly, and your prior career with the textile industry, play a huge role in economic development, industrial development, for communities, not just for states at large or for regions, but for small hometowns, right? And Craig and we've worked on projects around sidings and being that an economic development driver for companies coming in and wanting to locate either in Georgia or other places. And a rail is at that table having that conversation. Any example wins, or how does freight rail impact today's economic development landscape?
Sure. I think from a Georgia standpoint, even over the last 10 to 15 years, one of the biggest lands for Georgia was the Kia Motors
Yeah.
over in West Point, and that couldn't have happened were it not for the railroad. We are a large. Chances are all of the automobiles that we drive, chances are it was moved at some point by the railroad, at least the parts or the actual final car
Cars
itself.
themselves, yeah.
So that's been a big win, and of course, as you mentioned, our industrial development team actively involved in that. I actually have a list here that I had asked to be shared in Georgia and in Florida, but we've have done a lot with forest products as well as with the ag industry in moving, helping to land various companies there, as well as plastics also. And then you look down in Florida. I mean, the orange juice, the juice trains are pretty big for us. So we're moving those. So when you drink that glass of orange juice, think about the railroad.
Think about the trains that brought it, right?
Exactly. Think about the trains that brought it. But what we see with some of the others, I mean, I'm looking down this list of all kinds of commodities, and in all kinds of areas, not only larger areas such as the Tampa area, but also places as small as Pendergrass, Georgia, and Montezuma, Georgia. We'll continue to see that, and one of the main reasons is, of course, the growth in Florida and Georgia and the Southeast as a whole. People are moving to the South, and they're moving here because they like the weather, they like the cost of living. They for a variety of reasons, but with that, they are going to bring with them the same needs that they had wherever from where they're coming, and that is automobiles, refrigerators, other appliances, the need for food. We make a joke with my friends in the poultry industry that chicken's got to eat, and so we're moving feed. We move that feed into especially the northeast part of the state and other poultry facilities. So we're going to continue to see that growth. So we're going to continue to see a need for freight rail in both Georgia and Florida and beyond.
Yeah, I think that diversity, the fact that you had to scroll down through that list that you have in front of you of all the different commodities and projects and the impact that freight rail have is something I think our listeners can really resonate with. And I think it's going to be a little bit surprising, sadly, that people don't readily recognize that orange juice is connected to freight rail.
Right.
I think this is a problem, taking a step back more broadly for our industry, that problem of perception that logistics, call it, or supply chain have. People just expect that orange juice to just show up at the grocery store. The typical consumer, I mean, the typical housewife or house husband, don't really think about, I wonder how that came about or how that got here. And I think, frankly, if you're going to try to make orange juice or lemonade out of lemons that the pandemic gave us, it gave us a real opportunity to showcase the important essential industry that is logistics, that is freight rail around the nation, not just here in Georgia. So if you take some positive things that we got out of that, certainly true. And our audience knows that, but bears repeating for sure. So you talked about the investment side and the kind of things that the CSX is working on, the great impact that you have industrial development for small towns like Pendergrass or large towns like Tampa. It is a public-private partnership. You're the private side, so wearing that different hat than the roads and legislators wear. But you spend a lot of time underneath our Gold Dome here in Georgia and other domes around the 7-state region that you work. What are some of the topics and relationship building that you're doing legislatively to get that public-private partnership to benefit all those companies you mentioned and all those commodities? What are some of the legislative type issues that you find yourself talking about?
Right. Well, one of the biggest, especially in Georgia over the last several years, has been, the Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor recognized the need to really focus on logistics and freight funding. So if you look over the last couple of years, they passed legislation that helped to fund continued maintenance of the state's highways and bridges. Then they looked at funding transit which of course is important. And we're not talking, when we talk about transit, not just passenger rail, but buses and bikes and things like that, just and
Right.
all over the state. So then they turned their attention over the last 2-3 years to freight and logistics. Matter of fact, you have the Freight and Logistics Commission that came with its findings last year, and we were actively involved in that, not only at the port but also with in other areas where they held hearings, really kind of highlighting the need for awareness of the freight railroads, in addition with the other modes of transportation as well that move freight throughout Georgia, airlines, trucking, to name a couple. So what came out of that was really a need to, how do we identify, and this is ongoing, how do we identify funding opportunities? So one of the things that happened 2 years ago is there was a line item that was put in the GDOT budget for freight rail. And that's something that's not been there before. Now, it was unfunded. There was no money appropriated to it, but at least the line item was there.
Right.
So then this past year, we passed legislation, the governor did sign, that would allow, so in Georgia, we pay a sales and use tax for the diesel fuel on locomotives. So those funds go into the general fund of the General Assembly, for which the company that pays the bill gets no benefit. So we have advocated for years that this money that we pay needs to go back into our business in some way, shape, or form. So this year, what they did was pass that legislation that will move those funds into under the GDOT budget for use on freight rail. Now, there's still devils in the details there, and we'll be working with GDOT as we promulgate the rules for this. But what we hope to see is that money that we pay to the state we'll be able to use to partner with the state on projects. And a lot of these projects could be ultimately overpasses, for one, because we need to help, again, the fluidity not only of the freight railroad but also of the commuting public. They need to be able to get around and over our trains as we're moving, but also to enhance grade crossings. There are over 6,000 grade crossings in the state of Georgia. About a third of those are probably, if not more, are state-owned routes, roads. So we'll want to partner with them to make it safer and easier for the public. We'll also look at how can we use this to extend sidings, because one thing that you see now in the rail industry is that we're running longer trains. So those trains that used to be 7,000-8,000 feet are now going to be even over 10,000 and beyond. So the sidings that we have are not aren't able to hold those trains. So those are some of the projects that we hope to use with these funds as that pot continues to grow. And of course, for what each railroad puts in is what each railroad will be able to take out or partner with the state on. So Norfolk Southern and CSX obviously are the largest, will be the largest contributors, but also the short lines in the state will be able to utilize that as well. And only one other bill page I'll comment on is that the short line group did extend their short line tax credit here for Georgia, which will enable them to invest more and get a credit back, matching credit back on their on that investment, which will help because those short lines reach into areas and serve very vital companies that provide jobs and provide goods and services.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I obviously didn't know that. Many of our listeners wouldn't have. But that's great to see that. It sounds like progress. Sounds like you got a lot of work left to do. Good job security for you, Craig, and folks that build those relationships right with legislators. You mentioned short lines. Just out of curiosity, for our listeners and a little bit more of refreshing my memory, tell me how short lines work. Right, CSX, Fortune 500 company, Norfolk Southern, kind of brand names in the rail industry, especially in circles you and I run around in, but they might not be familiar with the St. Mary's short line, or how do short lines work as far as that network, and are they privately owned? Are they government subsidized? How does that work? with short
Sure.
lines?
So in Georgia, you've got about a little over 20, 21, 22. Don't hold me to that, but that in that area
20s.
number
Yeah.
of short lines in the state. And most of those lines are former lines of CSX or Norfolk Southern. They were
Okay.
lines that, for one reason or another, we were not able to, from an investment standpoint, could not make that investment, or in a situation, maybe the manufacturer that it did serve at the end of that line had gone out of business. So rather than just abandon that line or take that line out of service, we started to sell these lines, and they were bought up by, as you mentioned, private companies, but in some cases, the state bought up some of these short lines. And the reason they did that goes back to what we had talked about earlier, was primarily for economic development. So it will allow these lines, that most of which, or almost all of which, are in rural parts of the state of Georgia, it allowed these lines to stay. A private company that could give it a lot more attention, specific attention for that area, able to market that to potential industries to come in and set up shop. So what that did was it provided jobs in those areas. It provided good work, good paying jobs in a lot of cases, and was able to attract even more business. So what happens is they will move that over to CSX. So we will partner with our short lines in terms of having to make sure that we they'll come to our main line. Almost one way to look at it is, if you have an Norfolk Southern's I-75, CSX's I-85, these are your roads that get to those main lines.
Yeah.
So they'll take it out, and then we'll move it ultimately to most cases to the final destination. So we've got a great working relationship with those short line partners.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So connectors, it's not like a pretty critical part of your overall network. On top of the 20,000 plus lines that CSX runs and operates.
Exactly.
For sure. Technology is another part of that. Obviously there's not up to speed as probably it should be as the technology in the freight rail industry. I'm sure the technology on the locomotives themselves has really taken off. But something you and I have talked about before in years past is the technology that deals really with the track. You mentioned commuter rail as part of that run maybe on some of your lines. And when you have all these different partners, I think there's a phrase called positive train control that ties together all these different, making sure that you're able to operate on the same tracks. Where has technology gone? I've thrown a few sort of buzzwords out there, but what's the state of technology with freight rail, and where do you see sort of it heading?
Right. A lot of people look at the railroad and they see this steel on steel,
Right.
since it started, right?
Very mechanical, perhaps. Right.
Exactly. But if you look at, as you just mentioned, I mean, the cab of a locomotive, I've had the opportunity to be in our locomotive simulators that we do for training of people, and it's amazing how that works. If you've ever been in a dispatch center for the railroad, that's really the air traffic control for the rail industry, and it's amazing. I mean, you look at all these screens that are up all over the place, and you've got a guy making sure that the train meets, or happen in a safe manner. But getting back to what you also mentioned, the positive train control. So several years ago, Congress mandated that the industry implement this. And what that does is it allows these trains to operate via satellite, if you will. And if something were to happen, if the engineer or the conductor was to go into emergency mode, something wrong happened to them from a health related standpoint, and they ran a railroad red light, because of this operating and being followed by satellite, it could shut the train down. It just stopped the train, which is a great thing.
To safety perspective. Yeah, for sure.
It actually made it a lot safer, has made us a lot more efficient in how we operate. And it's an amazing technology that the industry spent millions and millions of dollars implementing and perfecting. So it's been very good for the entire industry, and we'll continue to see that to happen. We also see more technology going on at our intermodal facilities, and the way, again, from a safety standpoint, the way we investigate or make sure that the cargo that's coming in is kept safe. There's from a Homeland Security standpoint that everything is on the up and up.
Hmm.
And we used to do that where they come under these big machines, and almost like that X-ray, they're able to X-ray the truck as it goes through, which is
Just drive it right through. Yeah.
exactly, which helps us along with that. So there's all kinds of technology that is continuing to develop almost every day within the industry. So as we move into further and further here into the century, we'll see even other things start to happen to help us to operate more efficiently, but also keeping in mind that safety is the key priority.
Yeah, and I'm a little tongue in cheek here, but I'm so glad to hear that the federal government, I'm sure, is probably paid for all of that positive train control and all that technology investment, right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that was CSX investment making the rail
That was
safer.
CSX investment. That was the industry investment. So there's been a lot of, like I said, an awful lot of money put into this, and of course it was government mandate, but
Right.
and forced us to kind of speed up the process, because we were already in the process of seeing and had running some trials on some of our lines to see how that worked. But
Yeah,
we were able to get it done, and
it's awesome.
as well as working with some of our passenger partners as well.
Yeah, and continue to be profitable. Again, like you said, lose
Yeah.
sight that this is the opening the doors to the business of freight, and freight rail is a business, right? And
Right.
like you said, impacts so many different companies. You got to be profitable. You got to return dividends to your investors, and on, or you can't do all these great things that you've talked about. I mean, our
Exactly.
listeners certainly realize that as business owners, many of them themselves. So.
Mhm.
Well, Craig, I've got 100 more questions. We're kind of running out of time. I'd like to wrap up kind of where we started. Your personal freight journey. If you were going to look back at the young Craig Camuso, who's still young, but who started his freight journey back in 2001. What are some of the things or advice you'd give to your daughter who's floating on the water with the Marco Polo large container ship? What's some of the advice you would give to our sort of next generation of freight journeyers that are going to be coming on board?
Yeah, well, it's funny. My logistics journey actually started. I just realized this as we were talking, way before this, and it started when I was in college when I delivered pizza. I was a
Okay.
pizza delivery guy. So
Logistics,
actually, I
yeah.
could say I was in logistics really way back then in the mid '80s. But
Okay.
what I would tell young people is one thing I wish I had done actually is, as you decide what type of career you want to get into, regardless of what the career is, but talking about freight and logistics, it's to do your best to get real world experience before you get out of school. And sometimes that's tough, but there are companies are looking to see what their next generation of employee is going to be. So there's opportunities in there to get internships and
Mm-hmm.
to learn, because the best way to learn is real world,
Mm-hmm.
is to real world. You're going to learn a lot at the great institutions that we have, but when you get out in the real world is when you really start to see how things go. And I believe what my suggestions would be to anyone is, while you're in school, try to get an internship with a logistics company, whether it's a railroad or whether it's a trucking company, whether it's an airline company, whether it's a
Port Authority.
exactly. But it's amazing how much you can learn just by doing stuff like that. As I said, my daughter is working with the Georgia Port Authority this year, and she and I are having conversations that I never dreamed we would have. But
Cool.
it's been great, to hear her and see how she learns.
That's fantastic. Craig, well, thank you. You mentioned people wanting to intern. I'm sure CSX has internship opportunities. How can listeners or listeners' children get in touch with CSX or with your group? How can they find you guys out there?
Sure. So we, like most companies now, do this online. The best thing to do is to go to our website, csx.com, and there you can navigate through the pull downs and everything in terms of how you apply. And we're always, again, looking. I mean, the railroad industry, logistics, people look at logistics page and they think about whether it's a train on a track or a road on a truck on a road. But really, we've got internships or positions in real estate, accounting,
Mhm.
law, corporate communications, just to name a few. So there's all kinds of opportunities to get involved in the logistics process, not just operating that train. So I would suggest that they go online and see what opportunities are available.
That's a great point. Ties into your real world experience example of, getting out there and learning what's in the industry. It's an incredible industry. Like I said, in the onset, a well kept secret, frankly, too much so for our industry. And that's what we're trying to change here and tell those stories. I appreciate you telling your story, Craig. It's been great. Again, looking forward to this for a while. Thank you for being part of this. I know our listeners will get a lot out of it.
Well, thank you for having me. And Paige, thank you for your leadership, for what you've done over the years with logistics in the state of Georgia. You really brought it to the forefront. And I was just happy to be along for the ride, no pun intended, when you first started. So thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. On behalf of the Freight Insider Podcast, thank you. And remember to enjoy your personal freight journey. Thanks.